Hello and welcome to When Grooms Get Engaged, the podcast about a guy's perspective to wedding planning from two guys that are currently trying to survive their own. I'm Steve.
And I'm Chris. And each week we will talk about how we navigated a different part of the wedding planning journey, what we learned in the process, and what maybe we wish we had done differently. So, Steve, what are we talking about this week?
Chris, this week we are talking about finally finding a venue. You have your budget, you have your general idea of the guest count, you have roughly a date. So now you need to find a place for all these people that you're inviting to come to. And,
very big decision.
Oh my God, Chris, this is a huge decision. This will likely be the single largest outlay of cash that you have. So it's a big decision and it's a very important decision.
Yep, this with catering is going to be the biggest money sinks.
Oh my God, it's going to be huge. So Chris, when you and your fiance we're looking at venues, what kind of things did you consider?
Well, as I mentioned before, we did not have a clear vision of what our wedding looked like in our mind's eye. So we went on a lot of different venue tours. We thought we were being efficient by trying to fit in 12 or 14 in one day. And, I don't recommend that. They all start looking the same. You get hangry at the end. And so, definitely take pictures, take a lot of video. But we had to go back and look at all of our notes, a couple of days later to see what stood out to us, and what we liked. Obviously you're going to have your more traditional like hotel venues with ballrooms, but even within the city of Chicago, every hotel has a drastically different vibe and a different look from each other, as well as the event spaces or the banquet halls or the restaurants. So, when you're in a major market, the world's your oyster, and you just have to see a lot to know what you like and what you don't like.
Yeah, and Chris, your fiance shared your spreadsheet with us, and I actually had two thoughts on it. First, it's incredibly precise. There's so many notes, so much detail. You guys really, I feel like, saw every single venue worth seeing in the city. Like, I think you guys had 45, 35, like some insane amount of venues on there.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, and you had detail like, minimums, per plate, all that. And second thought, I'm pretty sure you could sell that spreadsheet. Because I know it helped us a lot. Right, just kind of narrowing down who is not even worth looking at,
Yep.
So I think you guys honestly should sell that spreadsheet.
Hey, future idea.
Right, $5. Here's all our research for the 2024 wedding season.
It's like all of those restaurant week guides that you see.
Oh my God, exactly. But yeah, so there's so many options to make, and Chris, I know one of the big things to consider is how big or small of a space should you be looking at for your guest count. So what do you think is a good general rule of thumb that people should think about?
I think you can't bank on, you can't predict who's going to show up to your wedding, right? So if you think you are going to have roughly 100 guests, you should not be looking at venues that have a max capacity of 100. Most venues will list that on their websites. You need to give yourself buffer because there's always your mom or dad are going to come with you and you're like, oh, we forgot about our second cousins twice removed that have 16 people that need to be invited, right? The guest list is always constantly changing. So you want to make sure that you're fitting your wedding size to the correct venue. What other tips do you have for the people?
I kind of just want to add to that real quick is when a venue tells you their max capacity, maybe just ask them how they got that number. It could be that the max capacity is using long squared off tables that can fit more people. And maybe that's not a look that you and your fiance want, that 100 people max capacity, if you're using 8-person circle tables, might only be 85. So definitely figure out how they're getting that number. Maybe it's also not including a dance floor. So like Chris said, do not look at your upper limit of your guest count. Give yourself 25, 50% buffer, because you also don't want people to be like sardines.
Yeah, we saw a couple venues that we really enjoyed, but their max capacity was 300, and we knew our guest count was going to be in the 125 to 150 range, and we knew we would have to spend so much more on decor, flowers, and whatnot just to fill out the space so it didn't feel empty, and that was ultimately the reason why we didn't choose those venues, because it was just too big. And we knew that, using the logic of our previous, guest count episodes, people should go back and reference it. That we had a tight guest list, but we wanted to make sure that everyone that we thought of that we wanted there could be there. And so we didn't want a venue that had less. So that's why we ultimately chose the venue that we did, that has a max capacity of, I think, 165 and will be about 125, and it should be perfect.
Yeah, and that's great. That's kind of what you want. You want the room to feel full, but also people to not, be on top of each other. So give yourself that good buffer. Don't look at your exact guest count.
Yeah, and you might have other things that you want to do there, right? Like, obviously, a lot of people want to have photo booths, or you might do, you might invite different artists like that do like watercolors or something like that. You might be like little spots that you want to have reserved for some other entertainment aspects of the wedding besides just like dancing. So make sure you leave room for those.
Especially the midnight snack. Very important.
I would say maybe the most important.
Chris, honestly, yes. I'm glad you are saying it, because I am agreeing. It is the most important thing at a wedding, is that late night snack, especially if you're having a lot of dancing.
I look forward to. It is I look forward to it more than the regular meal.
Okay, so real quick, when you guys start planning this, it's going to be hilarious. You're going to get quotes for your food and beverage, and like a person's plate will be, anywhere from $100 to $200 a plate. And then if you want to add like late night snacks, which is like burgers, hot dogs, and fries, it'll be like $10 a person. And it'll make you be like, can I just have the whole wedding? Burgers, hot dogs, and fries? It's so much money.
Especially coming from a city known for its hot dogs and deep dish pizza, it's was not much more expensive to add those late night bites. And we were just like, give it to us all.
You're like, yes, please. All of them. I would like everything. Thank you. But yeah, that stuff takes room. The dessert table takes room. The DJ or a band takes room.
Especially a band. Yeah. A lot of venues were talking to us like, that was one of the first questions they asked us, besides our guest count, are you thinking DJ or band? Because there's only certain places that they might be able to fit, especially if it's more than like a 4 or 5 person band, right? We recently went to a wedding that had a 12-person band.
Wow.
And they took a significant portion of the space. You have to be prepared to sacrifice some space for those things that you really want.
Yeah. So you have to ask yourself, besides people, what else is going to be in the space? Because then, we said 25, 50% buffer. Maybe you need 100% buffer. So your 100 guests might need a room that fits 200 people, just to fit all the extra things you need to do. One other thing to consider for the venue is, Chris, you mentioned the venue asking about the band, but the venue might also tell you, hey, you have to go with our vendors. Maybe you don't have a choice on what band or DJ to use. They just give you a booklet of a few that you have to pick from. So that's something else you need to consider is, can you do your own vendors, or does the venue force you to use their own?
Yeah, a lot of it was a mixed bag after interviewing a lot of different venues. Some were like, as long as they're insured in the state, you could use them. But most had a list of maybe 12 to 15 vendors, especially if the venue did not offer its own catering services. They had 12 to 15 caterers they would recommend because they know the space, they've worked there a lot, and it's just going to be planning wise a little bit easier with those vendors because they're in that space so much. So you ultimately don't have to go with those in a lot of cases, but it might be something, it might be worth considering just to make sure that you have a flawless wedding.
This is actually kind of a point I want to repeat is if a venue gives you preferred vendors, you may look at it as annoying and these are more expensive, but you also got to realize that these are also people that the venue has worked with. So the relationship will be easier. The setup will be smoother. And everything will go with much less hiccups because they've done it before, presumably plenty of times. So you also kind of need to factor in how much, is your time worth? Yes, you could maybe save a little bit going with a vendor that hasn't been used before, but it might be a little bit more headaches on the back end. So just kind of something to consider.
Definitely. And when you're selecting a venue, what are you typically seeing for like deposits or for minimums? Like what are the two kind of things that you see the most?
So when you're selecting a venue, this will be 25 to 30% deposit. And it will be based off of that head count that you give them. So like your rough head count. So, the one we figured out a couple episodes ago, that's the number that you're going to start this off with, because your final head count isn't due until maybe 45, 60 days before your actual wedding itself. So this is what you're going to be working with. And then also you got to realize that venues will charge you for potentially different things. So depending on where you go, you may get charged a space fee just to rent the space out, and then a food and beverage fee on top. Or the venue will just charge you food and beverage fee. Or the venue will charge you just a space rental fee, and then you have to go with one of their vendors for the food and beverage. So you kind of will be charged in a lot of different ways.
I think that's very important to keep in mind. And we talked about it on our budget episode too, but this is where those taxes come in and they hit hard. Convenience fees, food and beverage fees, those taxes are going to get hit hard here. So just make sure you're factoring those into your final cost for everything.
Man, I feel like those taxes are, you're in a boxing match and you're just getting jab, 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 and then the tax comes in. That's like the uppercut. They just don't expect out of nowhere. Here's an extra $30K. Bam. Yeah, that's when you get these contracts, that's when you need to read them. You got to understand what fees you're getting charged. Taxes are, it is what it is, part of life. Service fees, do they include gratuity or do they not? Do you get charged any sort of staffing?
That's a very
fees?
big one. Sorry to interrupt you there, but that's a very big one. Know whether gratuity is included or not, or if you see a service charge, know whether that is the gratuity or not, because a lot of times it's not.
Yeah, and usually it'll be spelled out, but if it's not, be a pain to them. Ask them questions like, who cares? This is your money. You got to figure out what you're paying for.
Yep.
The other thing is they may charge you staffing fees. Event coordinator fees, which we'll talk about later if you need one yourself or not, but some venues will come with them as well. But yes, definitely factor that in. You'll be looking at 25 to 30% deposit that you got to put down now for the venue of which one you choose.
And I know, Steve, you're doing a destination wedding. Were there any venues that you looked at, maybe besides the traditional hotel, while you were looking in Chicago?
So we did a wedding walk on Rush Street, which just looked at a lot of the hotels that were in that area, like a lot of the ballrooms, the more traditional ones. But then we also looked at a couple dedicated event spaces, and then a couple event spaces that were tied to restaurants and bars, right? And they all had very, very different feelings, right? And they all had different fee structures, which is also annoying because you can't just kind of use one place's fee structure to apply to everything. And they also had different things that their minimums apply to, right? Some places, you couldn't upgrade chairs or linens or tablecloths because their cost was pretty much at the max.
More hidden fees right there.
Yeah, but some places are like, hey, yeah, man, we're $110 a plate. It includes bar, food. We're like, wow, this is great. But then you see what that includes, and it's literally one chicken thigh, a piece of lettuce, and not even plastic bottle vodka. It's someone's bathtub vodka or something. So,
hey, don't knock my bathtub vodka.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, maybe the lower end price seems reasonable, but then when you start upgrading things, you're adding $20 a person here, $15 a person there.
Yep.
You will just get that price. The linens cost you $5 to $6, $7. You want to cover your chairs, another $8 a person.
Even if they say it's included, there are always upgrade options available. I mean, that's how a lot of these venues make additional money. And more often than not, they're going to be very tempting for you to choose, right? You don't have to, but just know that you should be factoring a certain percentage of additional cost into the invoice.
Yeah, and I will actually, because we looked at a couple places, and the place that we liked the most in the city, their per person price was $280, which may seem high, but when we actually looked into it, like what was included in that price, you had top shelf liquor, you had a high end like menu, you had a after wedding snack that was included in it. Like all these things that another place that was maybe $155 a person, we just had to add to it. So then by the time they were at parity, they were like almost the same price. So maybe don't just automatically knock someone out of the running because it looks like it's a high price. Like, see what comes in that price. Just make sure that you're not just disqualifying something because it seems too high, or you're just including something because it seems cheap, right?
You got to try to do an apples to apples comparison. And also, you brought up a good point too, is one way we found to save money, and one of the reasons why we went with our venue was because they allowed outside alcohol, meaning that we could purchase it from a Total Wine or a Binny's and have it delivered to the venue. They had their bartenders; they would make the drinks for us and serve the alcohol that we purchased, but we could buy it wholesale and bring it to the venue. So we ended up saving thousands of dollars by going that route.
Yeah, so this is actually a good point, Chris. If your venue allows you to do that, that will be a huge saver. Because I know, like, as we're getting older, our group of friends, we don't drink as much as we used to. So an open bar for our guests will just be pure money for the vendor itself. But if you can supply the alcohol, yeah, maybe you can save a little bit of money there. Doesn't hurt. Like, factor that in. That's definitely an outlay you got to think about.
Yeah, and the nice thing about working through Binny's in Chicago specifically is that they have a buyback program, and so if it's unopened and unchilled alcohol, they're willing to buy it back after the wedding, and so again, you're saving money there.
Or Chris, you can have a after wedding party. So much alcohol, why not?
Be a hell of a party.
Yeah, right.
We'll bring it to late night karaoke.
Oh my God, the best. But yeah, just a couple other things to consider also is, do you have any guests with disabilities, right? That you kind of need to accommodate. Most venues in Chicago at least have the basics, right? So they'll have like an elevator, they'll have a ramp, especially if they're newer buildings. But this is something you got to kind of look at your guest list and see who would need that accommodation and, how severe the accommodation or the disability is, right? So just kind of also consider that in the back of your head, like what you need to accommodate and what you don't.
Yeah, great point. We don't have anybody that would necessarily have any mobility challenges in the traditional sense, but we knew that we were going to have a lot of elderly guests, and so we were always looking at if there were stairs involved, elevator access. And then the other big one is at every venue we went to, we went inside the bathrooms and took pictures. Just to see how nice that was. Yeah, exactly. So like we wanted to make sure to see exactly how many stalls and everything that they had, and could they truly accommodate, a wedding of our size, because we were surprised at some of the venues that, said they have a 150 max capacity. There was like, at least in the guys, it was like 2 urinals and 2 stalls, and that was going to serve 150 people all night. So we're like, no, that's not going to work for us.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. That's actually funny you mentioned it, because the one venue that I know we both saw and we both liked, I remember thinking like how cool the bathroom was, but like it didn't go past that, just like it had cool wallpaper. But that is actually a good point. If you have 200 people coming, but your bathrooms are like 1% at a time, that could end up being a bit of a disaster.
And you also be surprised how many venues, their bathrooms don't match the decor or vibe of the regular space. Because we went to some nice, more chic kind of places, or like you could say farmhouse chic, but then the bathrooms were like farmhouse. It was kind of dirty, run down. There's like standing water even when like no one's there during these like site tours, and like it just didn't it didn't have the high class look that we were trying to go for, the like elevated look, I should say.
Oh man, that's like everything is great, but then there's that one little thing that just ruins everything else. Because like, yeah,
Yeah.
you don't think about the bathrooms, but if they're bad, you have to ask yourself like what other corners are potentially cut that we're not seeing, you know?
Yeah. And I know you're getting married in Greece, so I'm not sure how much of this is a factor for you, but you know, how did you think about outdoor space?
So getting married on a Greek island, everything is outdoor space, you know? Like the venues.
Do you have a rain plan?
No, there's like 1 day of rain for the whole summer in Greece, you know? But Chris, I would appreciate you just
I'm
don't bring it
knocking
up.
on wood right now.
Yeah, I don't need that juju. But yeah, I know our biggest issue was finding a venue that could accommodate as many people as we had. Because one of the problems about being on an island is that, you know, a lot of these places like aren't the biggest. And as you start going up to triple digit guest count, you kind of only have a few options. And if you want an option that's like, let's say on the sea, you would have to do potentially at a beach or at like some really, really nice swanky area in the middle of town. We ended up doing a villa, which is a big like way that they do weddings over there, like these islands, you know, like luxury villas. It's a big space that holds 200 people, but again, I guess it's only 100, so it's gonna be perfect. We'll have plenty of like room to kind of like move around, peruse, and it's all outside. So yeah, outdoor space was huge for us, and thankfully we're getting plenty of it.
I think that's going to be a make or break for a lot of our listeners and for a lot of people when they're deciding venues. Is, you know, it's becoming a lot more popular to have at least some sort of outdoor element. So think about that as you're looking at venues, but also be aware that with that typically comes a rain plan and potentially some additional costs or at least some risk with your planning, because you might have to pivot to a different area.
Yeah, and I will say one of cheap is a relative term, but one of the ways to make your wedding feel more elevated and luxe is having outdoor space. It just because it doesn't feel like all of a sudden you're having too much space, so like it feels empty because it's dedicated indoor and outdoor space. It just has that vibe of like access, you know. So if you can get outdoor space and what you're looking like, it will feel really nice, especially if you're like in a season that can enjoy it.
Yeah, it definitely is a cool atmosphere to, you know, be, you know, at least taking a break outside if you're able to, or like have an outdoor roof deck, you know, maybe overlooking the city, something like that. You know, it can provide some very special moments and some great photographs.
Yeah, it's so cool. Like if you can get outdoor space, I definitely recommend it. My sister Chris got married last year in Michigan, and her venue was, I don't know exactly what to describe it. It was like a standalone building, but it had like huge amounts of outdoor space with like fire pits and like places to lounge and chill. Like it was so cool. It was so nice having that space that you kind of just like step out for a breather, maybe just talk to someone outside of the music. It just felt so nice.
That sounds amazing.
And then just one more thing to consider is also how far is your venue from, like, let's say a church or from where most of your guests will be staying.
Exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, because let's say, Chris, let's say it's Chicago. You're getting married at, I don't know, let's say it's South Side, right? You're getting married by the McCormick.
Yep.
And let's say all of your guests are staying in Rosemont, because that's where all the hotels are.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds miserable. That's like, depending on traffic, an hour each way. Like, your guests will not be happy with that. You will not be happy with that. If people are late, if you're late, like, that's something else to consider, is where is this venue located?
Where the venue is located, you know, whether you're having it all inclusive. So like for us, we wanted to have our wedding, the ceremony, and the reception in the same place. That was kind of what we were looking for. So that was always kind of in the cards and in the planning for us. But you got to take traffic into consideration. Then also, if there is a significant distance, are you going to provide transportation for your guests? And if so, that again is going to increase the budget that you're looking at the end of the day.
Yeah, transportation is one of those sneaky fees that you have no way of gauging, but it will easily add a couple $1,000s if, depending on how much you do for guests. And Chris, you actually mentioned this as well. If you're having a reception and a ceremony in the same place, you need to make sure your venue can accommodate that, which will also limit where you can and can't look.
Yeah, and you have to think about the space in two different ways, right? It's not just a reception space. You have to think about how it's going to look for the ceremony, and then also kind of plan out the logistics in between, right? What's going to happen during cocktail hour and the room flip, right? Or is there a completely different space for the reception from the ceremony? Like, are they two different, if you're having it in a hotel, are they in two different ballrooms, or are they going to flip the same room, and where are your guests going to go in between? So you have to kind of plan that out with them.
Chris, this is one of the things that annoys me so much about our current wedding venue in Greece. So we're having the church wedding here in Chicago, just like a very small ceremony. But then we're having essentially the party, right? The reception in Greece. However, we're still doing like a symbolic reception there for the guests. But, and this is so annoying, it's at the villa. We cannot reuse chairs. So we have to have a set of 100 chairs for like the dinner portion, which is literally 10 steps away. And then we need to rent another 100 chairs for the actual like symbolic ceremony portion. So that's costing us an extra like $1,500. It's so annoying. And we asked our wedding planner, I'm like, okay, they're using these chairs for half an hour. Can we not repurpose them? She's like, no, we have to rent. I'm like, oh my God, it's so annoying. So
I'd be so frustrated with that.
I'd be so pissed. I was like, seriously, this line is what's making our like decoration budget not line up. Like it's the biggest single like outlay that's throwing that one off. I was like, oh, it's so annoying.
And there's always going to be one of these things. It's not we can't predict all of them, but like every venue has one little thing that's just like weird and specific to it that's going to like probably annoy the hell out of you, but just be prepared for it.
Yeah, there's always something, right? There's like, and it's something that to you makes zero sense. And it just sounds so perfectly obvious. And the venue's like, nope, $3,000, please. Like that's honestly what it is. It's so stupid. But yeah, these are things that you are going to need to consider. These are things that you are going to need to ask about. And these are things that will, if you go in with them already in mind and have these questions prepped, you cannot waste time with a venue that won't work.
I think maybe we should talk about some of the different venue types that, we come across or that I've seen or that you've seen, besides hotels. Were you considering any other kind of locations in your mind, or was it always that?
So I know like the traditional ballroom was never my first choice. I know personally, having been a waiter at a banquet hall, that was my last choice. Because I've seen just like so many of them, and then I know we had a friend that got married in a country club and actually did kind of like that a lot. I thought that was pretty nice. But these are all like traditional venues, which come with their own pros and cons, right? So they're professionals, usually everything will be in-house or most things. So you're not going to shop around for vendors too much. There's less to think about. And they will probably have at least an like day of, staff on hand to help you out. But the problem is that they're kind of more cookie cutter, right? Some of the venues, especially some of the banquet halls, might be like older, not as renovated. Food options might also be 10, 15 years in the past, And I know for me, Chris, like we've been to this wedding before. Like I've seen this wedding, I've worked this wedding. I've been at this wedding. So I kind of just wanted something a little bit more unique from our point of view.
Yeah. And there's definitely some very interesting event spaces, but I agree with you. Like we were considering hotels for that specific reason because they're professionals. They're going to do a good job. They do this, practically every weekend. But it does feel very cookie cutter. You're coloring within the lines. There's only so much you can do, and unless you start getting crazy with your floral budget, it's, you've been to this kind of wedding before, so I would encourage people to look at different options, especially if your budget warrants it. There are a lot of like unique spaces. You can look at like libraries, you can look at museums, like in the city that might be able to host your wedding like after hours. And it could be very interesting. So my cousin actually got married at the Chicago History Museum, which was like very unique and very cool. And then, as you said, like we both went to a wedding that was at a country club. Very nice to have that outdoor space, very unique space. And along with that, like now being on the East Coast, there's a lot of wineries as well. And I've always considered like that to be a very kind of special and cool, unique venue, especially if you want to have it outdoors. So look at wineries. And one other place I would say there is a event space in Chicago that is a glass blowing studio. They were very nice, very cool roof deck, very cool outdoor space. But it was very cool because they had a lot of the artwork from the artists presented in the space. But I just did not think alcohol and glass went together. I did not want to have any accidents, and that's something you have to consider, like especially if you're going to have kids at your wedding. We wanted to look at making sure that there were no accidents.
Chris, that's actually, we didn't talk about, but that's a good point. How many kids are you going to have there, right? You also need to kind of see if the venue is good or bad for kids. And that could mean, a lot of different things. It could be as simple as like, is their kids' meal any good? Do they even have a kids' meal? It could be, are they, in a building with a rooftop? Like, is the railing short, high? Like, could a kid potentially fall over? Like, this is something else you need to consider is how many kids do you have, and is the venue suitable for them?
We were still making a decision about kids when we were looking at venues, but one of the other top questions for us was, is there obviously a space for, us, the bride and groom, to kind of retreat to, have some breathing space, maybe do an outfit change, hold gifts or other things that we just want to have kind of secured in a room. But then also, was there a space to potentially have like babysitting services, right? Is there a separate room to have the kids, held there, I guess, for and entertained for the ceremony aspect? And obviously at a hotel, they probably have multiple ballrooms and meeting spaces, so that becomes a little bit easier. But your traditional event spaces might not have that option.
Yeah. And just one more thing on hotels. A lot of times if you book at a hotel, they'll give you like a free night stay at like a suite, right? If you spend a certain amount of money, they'll give you like perks and rewards. That's something else to consider. Some of the more traditional places, especially hotels that have like different branches, different, like Hilton will have like Hilton's, DoubleTrees, all these other brands. You might get points for staying with them, right? Which you can redeem for other things. So there might be additional perks going with one venue or another.
Definitely something to keep in mind because you can definitely get a lot of perks for doing the hotel route. Obviously, as you mentioned, like free upgrades and all that, it could make especially if you have a lot of people traveling for the wedding, right? I think that's a big component of this. If you have a lot of people traveling, any deal on hotel rooms is going to be great.
Yeah, and it's gonna add up quick, right? You're spending a lot of money and you get back, free night stays, you get back gift cards or like, certificates, points or whatever. Like that's nice because that'll pay for your honeymoon or at least the stay part of it.
Yeah, and also just again, beyond just having a nice venue, which is obviously important, I'll just throw this out there, like you also want to make sure that you negotiate with them on the hotel block, because if you are going to have a significant portion of your wedding guest list travel, it's a respect thing. Try to find the best deal for them and negotiate on their behalf.
There's actually so there's two parts of this depending on how you want to play it. Some hotel blocks might actually be more expensive because your guests are helping you pay for the wedding. This is a big thing in international weddings in like Mexico or Dominican Republic, the all-inclusive, where if you get a certain amount of people to stay, they essentially, you don't get charged for the actual wedding itself because your guests pay for it in their room stays. So I would also just make sure that that's not happening, right? If that's not something you want to do, just talk to the hotel.
That's a very good point. That's another venue type that we didn't touch on yet, was just like doing an all-inclusive. Besides just destination, but just having something all-inclusive can definitely be an interesting idea to have a wedding.
Yeah, we briefly talked about it because I know we were thinking like a February or March wedding originally, and in Chicago it would be cold, but in like Mexico or the Dominican Republic, it'd be like super hot beach weather. And we were briefly talking to a wedding planner, and the way they sell you on this is they sell you on, hey, your wedding will cost you $5,000, but you need to bring in like, 20, I forgot how it works. It's like 20 people for 3 room nights each or something. So 60 room nights to the hotel, and that'll essentially comp your wedding, right? That's kind of how they sell it. So that could be an option, but just know that you are asking a lot of your guests in that case.
Very right. And what do you think about how does seasonality figure into your venues?
Oh, seasonality is going to be, besides flowers. I know we briefly talked about flowers are insane, how expensive they are. It will be like one of the easiest ways to control your budget. So Saturday minimums and rental fees will be highest. And then peak season minimums and rental fees will also be highest. So I think peak season is like May to September, I want to say, or like June to September or something. So a Saturday in July will be the most expensive day. And then Fridays and Sundays will be a little bit of a discount in that. So hypothetically, like let's say you want to plan a Friday, February wedding, you will probably get the lowest rate for that particular wedding type. So you can kind of play around with that, and you will be able to save a good amount of money.
Very interesting. Anything else that you want to touch on when it comes to venues before we wrap up this episode?
I know we just finished talking about timing, but it bears repeating. If you are looking for a venue in a major market, you want to start shopping at least 12 months out, 18 months preferably, so that you have the most possibility of finding something. And let's say you find a venue that works and the Saturday isn't available, don't be afraid to potentially pivot to Friday. If the venue ticks every other box, except for the fact that Saturday is not available, Friday could also work.
And also one other point that I want to bring on that I know we touched on as well is transportation, but it's not just transportation the day of the wedding. You also have to think about anybody that is attending and flying in, that they also, how close is the venue to the airport, right? What's the cost for them? Are they going to have to rent a car or carpool with other people? Is it in a major city, or are you traveling, to the countryside where, you might need more of a truck or an SUV aspect, right? So just make sure you're also planning on your guest's behalf, like ways for them to actually get to the venue and the wedding once they fly and land in the city, because you shouldn't just be thinking about them on the wedding day. You should be thinking about them the day before when they actually land at the airport.
Yeah. No, Chris, that's a very good point. You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be for guests coming out of town because they're already traveling a long way for you. So if you can find something that's close to everything, that's going to make it much, much easier for them. And it will definitely be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why we chose not to have our wedding in the suburbs, but it was because that we wanted to make sure that our guests had easy access, into the city. And obviously we love the city of Chicago, but wanted to make it as easy as possible for people to get from point A to point B. So whether that be Uber or train or buses, like there's a lot of different options to get there.
Yeah. No, this is great. This is by no means an exhaustive list of things to think about. But these are definitely some things that you need to, at minimum, have, at the top of your mind as you're looking at venues. And then just one more thing I'll say is, if you find something that meets most of these, right? No place is perfect. There will always be something that isn't right. But I would honestly, like, if you're 85% of the way there, like, put a deposit down, you know, get a place locked in. You do not want to be struggling and wasting more time finding a place.
Yeah, and I guess I'm interested to touch on that with you because I found the process, at least for our venues, to be very relatively in our favor, I would say, because we could soft lock a certain date if we were very interested in it and very interested in the space. And then what that meant was if we held a date with a venue and someone else came looking and was also interested in that exact same date, if we had it soft locked, which meant like we had the right of first refusal. So the venue would contact us, say, hey, we have another couple that's interested in this date. Do you want to confirm yes or no? And you have 24 or 48 hours to respond to them to either move forward or to release that date. So be aware of that and ask your venue if that's something that you can do, and like you can tentatively hold a date with them, and then if they do get interest from another party, that's the only time you have to pull the trigger at that point. So just as you said, like try to get in there and see if you can hold a date if it's something that you're very interested in.
Chris, I actually have a quick funny story about that. Just kind of going over our venue finding in Greece. We were given a list of venues by our wedding planner, but we were actually given a list of venues by two different wedding planners because we were kind of interviewing two different ones to see which one like fit our style more. And at first we saw the prices for some of these and we're like, wow, some of these look really high. Does this make sense? And as we researched more, we realized, no, that's actually not high. It's reasonable. So we asked one of the planners we were talking to kind of just like place a hold on the venue we liked. But through talking with her, we decided that's not the planner we wanted to go with. We actually wanted to go with the other planner. So then we asked her to talk to the venue about, booking that date. And the venue's like, hey, this date's actually on hold already. But it was on hold by us, by the other wedding planner. So that was a super awkward conversation. We're like, hey, we decided to go with someone else. We're trying to book this. I know you're holding it for us. Can you unhold it so that we can book it with someone else? It was definitely awkward. But
you were bidding against yourself.
Literally, it was so weird. But one thing I will say, and we'll talk about wedding planners in the next episode, is this soft booking, hard booking. I know that with a wedding planner, at least in our experience, because they had that relationship, it was easier to kind of like hold dates and have a more personal communication with these venues.
All right. Any last thoughts?
Oh man, Chris, it's a wedding planning podcast. There's no last thoughts. There's so many thoughts to go, but in terms of the venue, this is all I have. This is a good starting point, and I do hope that this helped people listening, kind of going through their own journey.
Yeah, I hope this. There's a lot of information in this episode. I think a lot of it should just kind of, it's just like food for thought, right? And it just allows you like let this information kind of percolate in the back of your brain as you're looking at venues and start thinking about it. It is by no means everything you need to consider, but just some helpful hints as you begin your search.
Yeah, perfect, Chris. Well said. And with that, I think that brings us to the end of this episode. Chris, thanks for hanging out. Next week, I think we're going to talk about a wedding planner.
Ooh, should we or should we not?
Oh, that's only you can decide that, Chris, but we will give you some things to think about.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks, Steve.
All right. Thanks. See ya.